time in 15 years she climbed the hill alone. The bench was exactly where they'd left it. Weathered now, one slat looser than she remembered. The view of the harbor slightly more crowded with buildings that hadn't existed when they were 18. She sat down the way she always did, on the left side, leaving room renowned for someone who for the third time wasn't coming. Underneath the bench, where the wood curved out of sight, there were two sets of initials carved 14 years ago by two girls who believed completely, with the specific fearlessness of 18-year-olds, that nothing would ever be strong enough to keep them apart. B+N, forever, no matter what. Below the initials, there were two tally marks, one for each time she'd come alone. Tonight, she was about to carve a third. The pact had been simple. That was the whole point of it. Simplicity, it's a kind of armor against everything that might try to complicate it later. Every 5 years, no matter where life had taken them, no matter what had changed, they would meet at this exact bench, on this exact date, at sunset. No phones, no warning if you couldn't make it. Just trust that the other person would be there, the way you trust gravity, the way you trust the tide. They were 18. They didn't yet know how much life enjoys testing promises made at 18. At 23, Bay climbed the hill certain Noor would already be there, waiting, laughing at how long it had taken her to arrive. The bench was empty. She told herself it meant nothing. Life gets complicated. Noor had probably lost the date somewhere in the noise of becoming an adult, the way people do. She carved the first mark anyway, not out of anger, out of a quiet, stubborn hope that the mark itself might mean something, even if no one else ever saw it. At 28, she climbed the hill a second time. This time she'd allowed herself to hope more than she should have. A mutual friend had mentioned, months earlier, that Noor still lived in the city, 20 minutes away, maybe less, not overseas, not lost in some unreachable version of a life that had simply moved on, 20 minutes. Which meant the empty bench wasn't about distance. It was about something else, something she didn't yet have a name for. She carved the second mark and told herself this would be the last time. Some promises, she thought, are only meant to survive as long as the people who made them can still recognize each other. Maybe too much time had passed. Maybe the girls who'd carved those initials didn't exist anymore. And it was foolish to keep expecting two strangers to show up for an agreement neither of them had made. She almost believed it. But there was one detail she couldn't explain away, no matter how many times she tried. If Noor had truly let go of the pact, she would have expected her to forget the date entirely. Instead, every 5 years on that exact evening, Bia would get a single text. No message, no explanation, just a small, quiet notification from a number she still hadn't deleted. Ride 6:12 p.m. Someone, 20 minutes away, was checking the time. That detail sat in her for 5 more years, refusing to resolve itself, because it meant something contradictory that she couldn't reconcile. Someone who had truly moved on doesn't check the clock on the one evening a promise from adolescence comes due. Checking the clock meant remembering. Remembering meant it still mattered, and yet the bench stayed empty. For 5 years, she carried 2 competing stories about her best friend, unable to choose between them. In one story, Noor had simply grown into someone the pact no longer fit, a version of adulthood too busy, too far removed, too changed to make room for a promise made by a person she'd stopped being. In the other story, something had happened to Noor that had nothing to do with forgetting, and everything to do with fear. She wouldn't learn which story was true for another 5 years. Tonight, at 33, she climbed the hill expecting the second mark to become a third. She'd stopped hoping mostly. Hope, after 2 disappointments, learns to protect itself by lowering its own expectations first. She sat down. She let herself watch the last of the light fold over the water the way it always did at this hour, gold turning to rose, rose turning to something closer to gray. She reached into her bag for the small knife she always brought, the one she used only once every 5 years, for exactly one purpose, and that was when she heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. She didn't turn around right away. 15 years of disappointment teaches you not to trust footsteps, but they didn't pass by. They slowed. They stopped, several feet behind the bench, the way someone stops when they're not sure they have the right to come any closer. Honglere, says. If you've ever waited somewhere for someone who might not come, a bench, a doorway, a phone that might finally ring, you already know the particular kind of stillness B was sitting in. The kind where you're afraid to turn around, because turning around and finding no one there feels worse than never having looked at all. If there's a reunion you've been putting off, or a person you keep almost reaching out to before stopping yourself, we'd love to hear about it in the comments tonight. You don't have to share the whole story. Sometimes just writing, "I know exactly what this feels like," is enough to remind someone else in this room that they're not sitting on that bench alone. She turned around. Noor was standing at the edge of the gravel path, exactly the way she must have stood twice before, close enough to see the bench, not yet close enough to be seen. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. 15 years is a strange distance to close with words. It asks for something quieter first. It was Noor who finally spoke. "I came both times," she said. "I got to the bottom of the hill, and I couldn't make myself climb it." Bay didn't understand. "Not yet. Why?" Noor's answer wasn't the one she expected. She had been ready for an excuse. Distance, timing, a life too complicated to explain in one evening. What she got instead was something far more honest and far harder to hear. "Because I was afraid of what it would mean if I climbed up here and we didn't recognize each other anymore. I thought it was safer to lose you as a memory than to lose you twice, in person, watching it happen." Anglaras, that was the moment the story stopped being about a broken promise. Bay had spent 15 years assuming the empty bench meant Noor had moved on, grown past her, found a life that no longer had room for who they used to be. She had built an entire private grief around being forgotten. The truth was almost the opposite. Noor hadn't stayed away because she'd stopped caring. She'd stayed away because she'd cared too much to risk finding out. The friendship couldn't survive 15 years of separate lives. Every 5 years she'd climbed halfway up that hill, close enough to imagine Bia sitting there, and then turned around, not out of indifference, but out of a fear so specific it had its own kind of loyalty buried inside it. She hadn't wanted to lose the version of them that still felt perfect, so she'd protected an unspoiled memory instead of risking an imperfect reunion. It's a strange, quiet kind of love. Loving someone so much you'd rather miss them forever than risk discovering you've grown apart. It doesn't look like love from a distance. It looks like absence. But sometimes the people who stay away the longest are the ones who never stopped caring in the first place. They simply mistook distance for protection. Juan and Glores. They sat on the bench together as the last of the light disappeared over the water, the way they used to at 18, except now there were 15 years of unspoken life between them, waiting to be told. Noor asked what the 2 marks under the bench meant. Bay showed her. She watched Noor's face change as she understood what those 2 small card lines had been. Not resentment, not keeping score. Just proof that someone had kept showing up, year after year, refusing to let a promise made by 2 18-year-olds quietly disappear. "I thought I was protecting what we had," Noor said quietly. "By staying away, you were protecting yourself from finding out we'd both changed." Ba said, "I would have loved you anyway." Some reunions don't happen the moment 2 people are reunited. They happen in the sentence right after, the one where both people finally admit what they were actually afraid of the whole time. Hongrimra. Bia took out the small knife one more time. This time Noor's hand rested over hers as she carved the 3rd mark. Not underneath a tally of disappointments, but beside it in a different place entirely. Not a mark for another year alone, a mark for the year it finally happened. If there's someone you've been avoiding, not because you stopped caring, but because you're afraid of what it might mean if the reunion doesn't feel the way it used to, this is your reminder that the version of them you're protecting in memory was never as fragile as you think. People change. Friendships change. But the ones worth keeping don't need to stay frozen to still be real. Sometimes the reunion you're afraid to have is exactly the one that's been waiting for you the whole time. If tonight's story reached something in you, stay a little longer. There's another session waiting here in the closure room whenever you're ready for it.